Today we're going to be speaking about going past the gatekeepers, getting your foot in the door, something that most people, most entrepreneurs, most job seekers, most love seekers fail at. I'm speaking to a world-renowned expert on sales negotiations. He has some tremendous record in achieving sales goals for the companies he's worked for. As a consultant, I think it was. I'm welcoming EksAyn Anderson, all the way from Utah. Hi, EksAyn.
Yes, thank you, Serena. Thank you for having me on the show. What an honor to be on your show today.
Great to have you. Let me just throw in some of your credentials because they're quite impressive. And I do want to impress people because they might want to listen to what you have to say. So you've been featured on Forbes.com, Speaker Magazine, on TV, various business blogs and podcasts. You have a number of books. The one that is focused on going past the gatekeeper is called The Key to the Gate: Principles and Techniques to Get Past Gatekeepers to the Decision Maker. I'm going to show it a bit later on, show the cover. But you're also speaking specifically about being the CEO for your children, or how building a relationship within your family is sometimes even more important, and it follows the same principles as business success, negotiations, and going past the gatekeeper. So this is what I'd like to talk about today. It's a lot. So what are some of the first questions or state of mind that somebody needs to set themselves in? What is the first thing somebody needs to do to go past the gatekeeper?
Well, that's a great question, Serena. That's a great question. So if you're in business, if you're an entrepreneur, or if you're a salesperson, or just a business owner, the ability to influence other people is super important. How do I influence people ethically, in a good, positive way, so that I can present whatever it is I'm trying to present, or whatever it is I'm trying to influence them with? And so this is such a good question. Let me back up just a little bit. I had an experience at a bank many years ago, and I'll tell you, I had a problem with my bank account. The problem was is that I didn't put money in the bank when I should have put money in the bank. Okay, I went down to this bank. I was a little bit concerned because I was in the red, and there was a gentleman at this bank who helped me fix this problem. I put the money in like I should have, and he was really nice. He waived a bunch of the overdraft fees, and I was really grateful for his help. And when he was done, I said, "Hey, Jeff," we'll call him Jeff. I said, "Hey, Jeff, can I get the email to your boss?" And he looked at me kind of funny, like, "Well, why do you want the email to my boss?" And I said, "You know what? I'm going to write him a letter and tell him how appreciative I am for your help and what a great job you did." And by the way he looked at me when I said that, I could tell he was not used to that. But I went home that night and I typed up a letter that said, Dear branch manager," was the branch manager of this particular bank. "Dear branch manager, had the opportunity of speaking with Jeff. He was very helpful and professional. I think he deserves a raise and a promotion." And it was a sincere email, and I sent it to his boss, and I copied Jeff on the email, so just because I had his card and I had his boss's email. And when I was done, I didn't think anything else about it. He was nice. He'd helped me fix this problem with my bank account, and I had sent an email to his boss telling him how appreciative I was. And like I said, I didn't think anything else about it. What was really interesting, I went back to the bank, and this is back in the days when you had to go to the bank more than you do now, right? And I was standing in line. There were probably 10 people or so in front of me at this bank. And something happened to me that had never happened to me before. Somebody came up to me, and it was not Jeff, and it was not his boss, the branch manager. It was somebody else. They came up to me and they said, "Mr. Anderson." They knew my name, which was kind of interesting because that wasn't typical. I was in a fairly large city, and
Sounds like the Matrix.
I was on, could have been something like that. He
Mr.
said,
Anderson.
Yeah, Mr. Anderson." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Can I help you with your banking?" And I was a little surprised. I said, well, sure. And he said, "Follow me." And he took me from the back of the line, and he let me do my banking in front of everybody else. You would have thought that I had $10 million at the bank, which we all know that I didn't. And it happened again and again when I came to this bank. And it didn't start happening where they would take me from the back of the line, let me do it by making, until I had sent this email to the boss complimenting, with a sincere compliment, something about Jeff. Well, why do you think that happened? I ask people this sometimes. I say, "Why do you think that happened?" And let me tell you the answers I hear people say. They say, well, they probably wanted to get a compliment just like Jeff did, or they wanted you to write an email to them or something. I mean, that may be true. But if I'm going to fast forward several years later, I'm sitting in New York. I'm sitting across the table from this high level director in New York. And he looks at me and he said something that surprised me. He said, "You are the only salesperson I have ever led into my office." And I was surprised because competition was fierce for this particular product. Now, to be fair, he may have meant about the particular product I was selling, but that's not what he said. He said, you're the only salesperson I've led into my office. And then he said something really interesting. And I'll tell you, sometimes I'll ask people, say, what do you think he said next? And they're like, well, tell us. And I said, well, let me tell you. It was almost the same thing that happened in the bank years before. Let me tell you what happened. I'd sent this director an email asking if I could chat with him, you know. And when I sent the email, I was completely ignored. No response. Well, a few days later, I called in to ask to speak to him. And who did I run into? It was his secretary. His secretary picked up the phone and I said, "Hey, can I speak with Bob?" And she said, "He's unavailable," which they always say.
Yeah.
And I said, well, that's interesting. Maybe what I could do is just resend the email that I'd sent last week and copy it to you just to make sure he gets it. Would that be okay? And she said, sure. And as we were talking, I noticed that she was very friendly. She had one of those kind of bright, bubbly personalities. She was talking very friendly. And I said, thank you so much for being so professional and helpful. I really appreciate it. I said, I talk to people on the phone all day long, and it's refreshing to talk to someone as just friendly and professional as you. She said, well, thanks. And as I was pulling up the email, I thought, I'm going to mention that to your boss. And I told her, I said, I'm going to mention that to your boss. And so what I did is really quick, I had her on the phone and I was sending it to her boss and copying her on it. Janice, we'll call her. So we'll call Bob. Bob is the director in New York. Janice is the secretary. I'm sending it to Bob, but copying it to Janice. And I just typed really fast. I said, "Dear Bob, I had the opportunity of speaking with Janice. She was very professional and courteous. I think she's an asset to your team. By the way, I'm going to be in New York on these days." And I sent it to Bob, copied her on it. And I said, "Hey, did that email come through?" And she said, "Well, let me check." There was a little pause. She said, "Yeah, it came through." And then she said, "Hey, thank you for the compliment." And I said, "Well, I meant it. It was sincere. Thanks for being so awesome to talk to." That was it. The conversation ended shortly thereafter. Well, fast forward, I'm back in the high level director's office. He's just looked at me and said, "You're the only salesperson I've let into my office." Here's what he said next. He said, "The reason you're here is because you were nice to my secretary." He said, "I talk to my secretary more than I talk to my wife. Some of these sales guys don't understand that." And I got to tell you, I thought, Zarina, that was super interesting. Let me tell you what he did not say. He did not say, "You have the best social media I've ever seen. That's why I let you in." He did not say that. He did not say, "You have the best website," or "You have the best." He said, "It was because you were nice to my secretary." Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And just treating people right is what gets you through the doors.
Yeah. Awesome story. It reminds me a lot of the principles that I've read in a few books. I can't remember whether it was Zig Ziglar's "See You at the Top" or Napoleon Hill or Stephen Covey's "The Seven Principles of Successful People." One of these three, or maybe all three, actually mention exactly what you're talking about, like praising people and finding the gems that people have. And I have read about this approach, and it's very interesting to hear a story where you've actually applied it and how it works in real life. Yeah.
Well, and the truth is, it's just treating people like you want to be treated. It's not rocket science. I mean, who doesn't want to have a compliment to their boss about something that's important to them? I mean, but I think the thing that did it was that it was unexpected. And I think if you can remember in life to do things, let me back up really quick here. We have what are called expectations. We expect a certain something, like in our relationships with other people, but a lot of times our reality comes in lower. And so if I expect something up here, but my reality comes lower, the distance between these two things, this distance here is called frustration. And so if I set an expectation with somebody, but I don't deliver, they're frustrated. Good salespeople don't do this. Good salespeople keep the lines together. They do what they say they're going to do. But great salespeople or great influencers, they learn to flip these lines. In other words, what they do is they make people's reality better than they expect. And then this distance in here is actually delight. It's awesomeness. It's referrals. And so I didn't know I was doing it at the time, but I think I accidentally stumbled into this. You know, Jeff deals with people all day long. He expects a little something, but by the end of the call, he actually had an email from me to his boss telling him to give him a raise. That was better than what he expected. And so he was delighted instead of frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything we do in life, if we can figure out a way to make people's reality better than they expect, our ability to influence them goes way up.
Mm-hmm.
Super good question. And I like what you said.
Does this work according to your experience in all situations, or do you find that these two situations were particularly lucky because of the relationships that people had already created prior to you entering the whole conversation? For example, the secretary was already, you know, in a good standing with her boss.
So that's a great question. So in answer to your question, I'll back up. You can do everything right and people can still tell you no. Okay.
Right.
Because there's a principle called free will. People can choose. But the research shows that the chances of people you're being able to influence someone go way up when you are the first to be kind to them, the first to do something nice for them. When you're the first, you don't wait for them to be nice to you. You be nice to them first. Do it without expectation. It wasn't like I'm saying, hey, I'll do this, but you got to give me a point. I was just saying, you were great. Let me give you a compliment. And she was the one who felt like, wow, he did something nice for me. I'm going to get him into the boss.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't. Now, here's the other thing. Two things I want you to point out. I did not get into that CEO because I knew the CEO's buddy or because I knew some senator or some politician. It was the secretary.
Right.
And the truth is, some people want to treat important people really important and other people they don't think are as important.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not true. The truth is, the world's upside down. The person who had the most power in this whole situation to get me in was the secretary, who some people might consider lowly. If you treat everyone you meet as a king or a queen, you treat them with dignity, you would be surprised how many times the secretary is the mom of the CEO.
Mm-hmm.
You would be surprised how many times a janitor is the brother or the relative or the in-law or somebody related to somebody. Treat everyone you meet with respect. And when you do that, people can tell you're not a snob. They can tell that you care about others, and they want to do business with people who are like that. Here's the next thing. You mentioned something. I want to say one more story. My wife, this same principle applies in relationships. Let me tell you one thing. She once told me, she said, hey, I really miss my parents. And she said it again and again. She goes, I'm really missing my parents. Well, her parents happened to live in San Diego, California at the time. And I decided that I was going to try to make her reality a little bit better than she expected because I wanted to do this. So anyway, I went and bought a plane ticket to San Diego. I didn't tell her. I had my oldest daughter pack a bag, so I made sure I had the right things. We were driving down to see some lights during the holiday time. Where I live, a lot of times they have a lot of lights in December during the holidays. And as we were driving down, there's a part in the road that goes down to the lights. And we had a bunch of cars that were going down to see these lights together with my family. And then there's a way that goes this way that goes to the airport. And I secretly had packed a bag and bought her a plane ticket to San Diego, but I didn't tell her. Right. Well, as we were going down to see the lights, and she thought we were going to see these lights, about 3 miles before we got to this turn in the freeway, she said, I'm really missing my parents. And I thought, this is such perfect timing. I said, I think you should go see your parents. As we got to this fork in the road, the car turned this way. All the cars that we were following went down to the lights. And I turned towards the airport. She looked over at me. She said, you missed the turn. And I said, yeah, I think you should go see your parents. And she thought I was just being silly and that we were going to be. We pull up to the airport terminal and I pop the trunk and I pull out a bag and I hand her little, her little boarding pass thing. And I hand her the luggage and the boarding pass, like you said. And she looked at it and she goes, is this real? She says, is this real? I said, it's real. She goes, is this real? I said, yeah. You go enjoy your parents. I'll take the kids for a few days and just have a great time. Well, I got to tell you, Zarina, that was probably the best thing I ever did for my marriage. I mean, things were really good for a long time. And why? It's because a lot of times maybe my wife expects things from me and I don't come in quite as good. And so she's frustrated. But in this situation, I was able to flip the lines where her reality was better than she expected. And because of that, she was delighted. And if you can do that in your relationships, if you can do that with people you work with, if you can do that with your children, if you can do that with everybody, your ability to influence them goes way, way up. Now, they can still tell you no. They can still say, I don't want to meet with you. But I'm guessing that a lot of the people on your podcast are very highly intelligent, awesome people who can come up with a 1,000 different ways to make people's reality better than expect. Such a great question. Thanks, Serena.
Oh, thanks so much for the great story. It's really heartwarming. Is it all about well-meaning and installing positive emotions in people, or is there something else to the secret of opening the gate?